Hey y'all, this is Brown at Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 40th anniversary edition on DVD. The movie came out in 1974, and it was directed by Tobe Hooper, and it was written by both Hooper and Kim Henkel. And when they made the movie, they were wanting to do something that basically, served as a dark reflection on American culture at this point in time. You had the Vietnam War, which was winding down but still ongoing. You had the Watergate scandal, which was still fresh on the minds of the American public. And you had the 1973, oil crisis, which carried over into 1974, which is when the movie was made. And you had the economic depression of the 1970s in general. So, for the average American citizen, it was a tough time to be alive, from what I understand. But because of all this, I mean, the American public, started to, view those in power with a sense of cynicism and distrust. And, basically, if those in power are going to abuse their authority, I mean, what keeps, average, American Joe Blow citizen, safe from them? And if we're involved in a war that, we had no business being involved in, I mean, who's to say it's going to stop there, and we end up getting involved in something else. And, because of the, scarcity of resources, I mean, you have this, unpredictable feeling in the air of, not knowing if you're going to be able to, go from one day to the next, because you're not guaranteed, to be able to have stuff like fuel or food or, a roof over your head, let alone a job. So, I mean, overall, from what I understand, it was a very, uncertain time. And so, with that in mind, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's one of those movies that removes the safety net that a lot of horror movies up to this point had. Because, I mean, to be sure, there were some horror movies prior to Texas Chainsaw Massacre which, were disturbing or genuinely scary. But for the most part, a lot of horror films were done with a sense of fun. I mean, yeah, you might have a jump scare or here and there, but the audience, knew that they were just, having a good time, and, have some popcorn, have some Coke, and then go home and laugh about it, right? But Texas Chainsaw Massacre took that safety net and just threw it out the window and took the audience and, brought them headlong into a ride into, rural hell, along with the, main characters in the movie. So one of the things that makes this movie work so well is that because of how it's shot, it feels like you're watching a documentary in a lot of ways. And also because of the fact that, Tobe Hooper and his people hired mainly unknown actors, for the lead roles, you feel like you're just watching, ordinary people, a group of friends and a couple of siblings, going on a road trip that, ends up becoming a nightmare. But because of how it's done, though, I mean, you just feel like you can relate to these people in a lot of ways simply because of how, ordinary they are. Because there's no one famous playing them, you feel like, I mean, these are people that you could, see on the street or something like that. I mean, if you were in the 70s, that is. But it has a similar feeling that Ridley Scott's Alien had, in a sense that because of the main characters in that movie basically being, blue-collar truck drivers in outer space, I mean, you felt like, you could relate to those people. And it's a similar feeling in this movie with the main characters here. Also, you had stuff like the production values and the sound design, which, really went hand in hand in, making, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre into one of the most disturbing movies ever made. And it's definitely become one of the most influential and iconic horror films ever made. And so many films that came after it, owe a lot of, debt to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But when the movie came out on screen, it was basically a lightning in a bottle type movie, because while the making of the movie was very stressful and very chaotic, once it hit the screen, everything just fell into place, and you had a horror movie which was, just about perfect. And even though Tobe Hooper went on to direct other movies after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and some of which were actually pretty good, none of them had the same impact that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had, in the sense that you had a very very you had a very it was very much a documentary style horror movie, that felt like something that you were something real that you were watching unfolding on screen. And and it's just one of those movies that there's a reason that he's got a spot on the Horror Hall of Fame in a lot of quarters. And even though none of the movies they made since Texas Chainsaw Massacre had the same impact, not to say that none of his movies were any good, it's just that none of them had the same impact that Texas Chainsaw Massacre did. But at the very least, though, this is definitely something that cemented his place as a master of horror, so to speak. But let's go ahead and get into the story. So it starts off where there's been a rash of grave robberies in the Texas countryside, and a group of friends. You had Sally and her boyfriend Jerry. You had Sally's brother Franklin, and you have their friends Kirk and Pam. Decide to go on a road trip to check out the cemetery where a couple of their family members were buried at, just to make sure that none of their family members' remains were tampered with. Because that particular cemetery was one of the ones that was hit by these grave robberies. So they go to check it out, and thankfully for them, their family members' graves had been left intact. Not that other people couldn't say the same, unfortunately. But after having checked out their family members' graves, they drive on down the road, and they pick up a hitchhiker. And unfortunately, this hitchhiker is batshit crazy. And he regales them with his experiences in working in a nearby slaughterhouse, and goes into graphic detail about how the animals were slaughtered there. And he bemoans the whole idea of the process of killing cattle being replaced by, say, machinery. Because he was talking about how there's much more purity in killing cattle with, say, like your bare hands, or a knife or something like that, or a hammer. But with the emergence of this bolt gun that's started to be in use, it put a lot of people out of jobs. And so he basically just regales them with gruesome accounts of his time at the slaughterhouse. But he also proceeds to take the wheelchair-bound Franklin's pocket knife and cut himself, just for shits and giggles, right? And and he gives shocked Franklin his knife back, and the rest of the group are kind of like, okay, we need to ditch this guy. And then the hitchhiker, he proceeds to take a camera out of his pack and take a picture of Franklin, and basically demands a couple of bucks for it, even though it's a lousy picture. But when Franklin's like, no, I'm not giving you any money. I mean, it's a lousy picture. Plus the fact that you got this guy who's literally just cut himself and is bleeding on everything. And so the hitchhiker gets a little pissed off at this, and decides to set the picture on fire in the van. And then he takes another knife out and starts, slashing at Franklin and cuts Franklin's arm. And at that point, the group's able to stop the van and pitch the hitchhiker out. And the hitchhiker starts chasing them as they're driving off, and with his hand that's been cut, he smears this bloody palm print on the side of the van, but then the van leaves him, and so he's left to wander the road. But everyone in the van, they're freaked out, and Franklin's freaking out because he's just been cut, so they patch him up as best as they can. But then they notice that they're getting low on gas, and so they pull over at this gas station where this old guy comes out to talk to them and see how they're doing and everything. And while his helpers clean the van up, the windshield and everything, and the proprietor of the place, the old gentleman, tells him that his tanks are empty, and it's going to be a few hours before the supply truck comes in, to refuel the tanks, or to refill the tanks. But then again, it could be early in the morning the next day that the supply truck comes in. So there's no way of telling. But they asked for directions because they had wanted to go by the old house that Sally and Franklin grew up in, where they used to live with their parents, but unfortunately their parents had died a long time ago, and it was their graves that they'd gone to visit initially. But they were wanting to check out the old homestead, and they were asking for directions from the gas station to where the old homestead is. And so the old guy, he's asking him, why do you want to go there? Why do you want to explore an old house? And so when they explained that they used to live there, the old guy is basically trying to steer him away from the place. And but then when they are adamant that no, we want to check out where the place we grew up in, and our friends want to come with us. And so the old guy is like, okay, but just make sure you stay there. If you go over there, stay in that house. Don't go to other people's property, because there's some nearby places, nearby houses in the area that the old guy says that basically they don't like unwelcome or unexpected company, and don't mind letting said unexpected company know they don't want them there. So he tries to steer him away from going in that direction. But once he sees that they've made up their minds, he's like, okay, but if you go there, just make sure you stay at the house you used to live in. Don't go anywhere beyond that. But so since they weren't able to get some gas, they got some barbecue instead, and they politely turned down the old proprietor's offer to let them sit there until a supply truck comes in for the gas. But they decide to just drive on down to the old homestead, and once they get there, they explore the place, and they find a couple of strange things, like someone's been there at some point and has left some weird ornamentation made of bones and feathers, and so while a couple of them are staying at the place, just kind of looking around, two of them, let's see, sorry, I had to check the names. Kirk and Pam decide to go over to where this nearby watering hole is, and they're just to do some swimming, right? And so they ask Franklin for directions, and Franklin tells them where to go, And so Kirk and Pam, they head over to where this watering hole is supposed to be, and they're looking forward to going swimming, but unfortunately it's all dried up. But you know, but then they hear the sound of a generator, coming from nearby, and and they decide to check it out because as Kirk says, a generator means electricity. Electricity means gas, and so since they need gas, they decide to go wherever the generator is, and see if they can find the owner of the house to buy some gas off of them, just so that way they can have some gas to take back to the van. And so they go to this dilapidated house, that has a lot of strange ornamentation in the yard, as well as this large camouflaged net covering several old cars. But unfortunately, though, in checking this place out, they find out the hard way that it's inhabited by the killer Leatherface, who's this large, burly individual, as see on the cover here, who likes to use chainsaws and hammers to kill people with, and he's also mentally challenged too, and he mainly communicates in grunts and pig squeals. But once Kirk and Pam make their way into this house to check things out, they come across Leatherface, and well, let's just say that things don't go so well for them. And so from there, the other three, Sally, Franklin, and Jerry, start to get the feeling that something's wrong, considering that Kirk and Pam have been gone for a while. But then in deciding to try and find them, well, they end up falling into Leatherface's world as well. So yeah, I'm just giving you all the abridged version right there, right? But yeah, so this movie, it hits home in a lot of ways. I mean, mainly because of the immediacy of the horror, in the sense that you have like this ordinary group of people just having a fun time, and then they end up coming across some homicidal maniacs and cannibalistic ones as well, and you have, but you also have just the raw carnage that is more implied than shown on screen. But when we see Leatherface for the first time, it's a very understated moment, because there's no sudden music score or music cue to show that he's coming, right? It's just that one character wanders into the house and hears these pig squeals and coming from this corridor, and they go check it out, and then Leatherface is just right there, and it's just like a oh my god moment, just because of how terrifying he looks. And you look on the back here, I don't know how well I can see that, but that's basically the first shot you see of Leatherface. And for the time especially, it's a very terrifying moment. And the way they have Leatherface depicted, it's a rather interesting portrayal, and the actor Gunnar Hansen, who I believe is Icelandic American, was a very giant individual, and he played Leatherface in a way to where Leatherface was mentally handicapped, and basically acted. You got the idea that he was like a child in a man's body, like a mentally stunted child in a man's body. And Gunnar Hansen in real life, you find out, like in the commentary tracks, that Gunnar Hansen actually went to a couple of special needs schools at the time, to sort of do some research and and see how mentally challenged kids functioned, like how they moved and their methods of communication and what have you, because he was wanting to play Leatherface as someone who was mentally challenged and never learned to talk. And so what you get is a character that comes across as more, in some instances he comes across as a force of nature, because there's no personality there at some points, but then you'll have a glimpse of a personality in a sense that he literally comes across as a this scared big kid who's wondering why these people keep coming into his house. And so I mean, yeah, it's terrifying that he's killing them, but at the same time there's like a perverse sense of humor in a moment or two involving Leatherface, where the way he's acting, I mean, they even say it on the commentary, like he's freaking out and wondering why these strangers keep coming into his house, and so that's why he's so defensive. That, and well, he and his family are cannibals too, so but in this case their food's breaking into the house, and so he's like back. But yeah, so I mean, it's a very fascinating portrayal and a very memorable one too, because I mean, visually speaking, Leatherface is a very terrifying character and a very memorable one as well. But Gunnar Hansen, does such a good job of portraying him, like alternating between, this, force of nature, and then to say, this, scared, kid in a big man's body who, is, just freaking out at all these people, coming into his house uninvited, But when we see him in action, though, whether it's a hammer or a chainsaw, it's pretty scary. And one of the funny things is, you find out in the commentaries as well, is that when he's chasing one of the characters with a chainsaw at night and outside, in real life, Gunnar Hansen, I mean, he's a giant of a guy, but he was a really fast guy too. And here he was with a real chainsaw, going after this one particular actor. And the actor is supposed to be able to outrun him, but Gunnar Hansen, as large as he was, just kept on catching up to the person. And so, like, at some point he would have to stop and just randomly start, chopping at tree branches with his chainsaw. And like, it's funny, you see it on screen, and it's funny in a way, because you're like, wait a minute, he had the person dead to rights, why is he stopping to cut tree branches all of a sudden? But it also kind of adds to the whole idea that he's supposed to be a mentally challenged individual, so it actually works in a lot of ways. But also, as far as, say, like the other characters go, Edwin Neal plays the hitchhiker that the group picks up, and my God, I mean, with respect to Gunnar Hansen as Leatherface, I mean, like, he's the most visually striking member of this killer family, for a reason, but Edwin Neal as the hitchhiker, I think, is more disturbing, because here he is, I mean, on the surface, I mean, just like an ordinary man, or an ordinary young man, if a fidgety one, but at the same time clearly disturbed, in some way. Excuse me. I mean, in a sense that he's covered in blood from the slaughterhouse and what have you. And also just very fidgety and everything, and he's clearly off kilter mentally, in a sense of his topics of discussion, and basically no social awareness whatsoever in terms of, say, like how much his line of conversations disturbing those that he's talking to, namely the group of friends there, right? But it's just, you don't know what he's going to do. I mean, even watching the movie again, there's still that unpredictability with his character. Like, that there's something wrong with him. There's something that's just off. And, his fidgety nature and his, it just, it's a very, you know, spooky portrayal just because of how unpredictable his character is. And it turns out, yeah, his character's batshit crazy, like I said earlier. But Edwin Neal, though, apparently, you know, he jokes that, you know, his part in the movie was responsible for this decline in hitchhiking, you know, shortly after the movie was made. You know, I mean, that's how scary his character was. And Jim Siedow as the old man or the proprietor of the gas station. His character is, you know, very memorable as well, because it's like, you know, he comes across as a nice guy, and in some ways he is, I mean, kind of an affable fellow, but when you find out certain things, like you find out he's involved in, you know, this killer cannibal family and what have you, he in a lot of ways turns out to be scarier than the hitchhiker, in the sense that, you know, on one hand, he's more, I guess, on the surface, a likable individual, like socially speaking, like comes across as, you know, a jolly old man, right? But when you find out just, you know, what his culpability is in you know, this killer, you know, cannibal family schemes, I mean, it's interesting because he, you know, goes back and forth between, say, you know, once, you know, his cover's blown, or once the jig's up, he goes from, say, joyfully, you know, tormenting his, you know, victim or victims, but then he, at the same time, you know, he talks about how he doesn't want to torture them, you know, unnecessarily. Like, he doesn't find any joy in it, and yet, you know, here he is, like, poking him with, you know, a broom, you know, that kind of thing, and laughing about it. But then at the same time, in the same breath, he'll just be like, you know, we don't need to torture him, we just need to get it over with. You know, there's no fun in it. You know, there's, you know, no point in, you know, making them suffer. But then at the same time, it's like he goes back and forth, and it's like, with his character, you see this sort of internalized battle manifesting, you know, on the surface, you know, because you literally watch his face, you know, later in the movie. And Jim Siedow just does such a good job of showing, you know, this character who, you know, seems to be, you know, trying to keep some measure of control of himself. Like, I mean, yeah, he's obviously a part of this killer cannibal family, but at the same time, you know, he's like, okay, you know, I can't just, you know, wig out like, you know, the other two here. I mean, I've got to keep up appearances. And also, I mean, there is something to be said for, you know, killing, you know, taking care of the meat in a rather efficient manner, so to speak, you know. But yeah, Jim Siedow does such a good job of, you know, showing that, you know, struggle, you know, coming, you know, to the surface, you know, because it's like he plays two different characters at the same time, and it's like he's trying to, you know, decide, you know, which one he wants to be. Does he want to partake in, you know, the carnage and festivities, so to speak, or does he want to, say, you know, just, you know, do things in a way that, you know, is, you know, quick and, you know, to the point, or with as, you know, little pain as possible, you know, that kind of thing. So, like, it's strange because, like, all three of the, you know, family members are, you know, terrifying in their own ways, but it's just interesting how they're all, I guess you could say, relatably terrifying as well. Because, I mean, you got Leatherface, who's basically, like, I guess you could say, you know, the pet dog of the family, and you have, you know, the hitchhiker, who's, you know, the unruly kid of the family, and then you have, you know, the old man, who is the put upon dad of the family. Then there's Grandpa, who, let's just say, you know, they make the idea of someone who's 100+ years old, somehow still being alive, something that's one of the most disturbing parts of the movie, because it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like there's these dead bodies in the house and everything, and you're thinking that this is one of them, right? But then you find out that, oh my God, this guy is somehow still alive after all this time, and is as far gone as he is, I mean, he's more than happy to partake in things as far as the cannibalistic side of stuff goes. So yeah, I mean, the people, I mean, the characters, the cannibal clan, I mean, very, very terrifying, in a very unique way, like, and they're all terrifying in their own ways as well, but together, yeah, one very twisted family. But as far as the protagonists go, I liked how, because of casting unknown actors, or predominantly unknown actors, I mean, they come across as just ordinary and nothing special, which, I mean, enhances their relatability in a lot of ways. Like, there's no there's little to no showing off for the camera or anything like that, like, say, someone who was more established might do. But at the same time, though, I think if there's anything in the way of character development, I think the character of Franklin stands out, the Sally's brother who's wheelchair bound. And Franklin is a character that is annoying and isn't very likable, but at the same time, you can kind of feel pity for him, because, I mean, here he is being dragged around on his trip, and he's wheelchair bound, and he doesn't have much in the way of control as far as like, I mean, yeah, he can move himself along in the wheelchair and everything, but they're out in the country and there's not a lot of wheelchair accessibility. And, he has a couple of things happen to him, like some embarrassing and then some terrifying. And so you can't help but feel sorry for Franklin at times, but then at the same time, you kind of just want to smack him in the face because he keeps on complaining. And one of the funny things is, like, you find out in some of the behind the scenes commentary, like in the commentaries, the actor who played Franklin, who was Paul Partain, excuse me, who sadly passed away a few years ago, I believe. He actually talks about how he went out of his way to annoy, his fellow actors, like the ones who were playing, his friends, but also Marilyn Burns, the actress who played his sister Sally. And he did a really good job of annoying her, apparently, because, she admits in the commentary she literally just wanted to slap him, And, most of the time when they were filming, he kind of stayed in character, because his thing was, he tried to get to a point, like he talks in one of the commentaries about how he tried so hard, to get to, the point where, he had the mindset of Franklin down, and he put so much of himself, in so much effort into that role that he felt like, okay, if I come out of this, I'm not going to be able to get back to that point. And so, even say when the camera was off, he would stay in character, and it wasn't until after the movie was made, that he basically came back to being himself, and his fellow cast members were surprised at how friendly he was in real life, because, it's like working with him, he was just, playing, Franklin on and off camera. He was playing like this annoying wheelchair-bound, twerp. So, yeah, Franklin was definitely the standout of the actors as far as, say, character development goes. Alan Danziger as, Sally's boyfriend, Jerry. You had Teri McMinn as, Kirk's girlfriend, Pam. And then you have William Vail as Kirk. They do okay with what they have to work with, and they come across as or just ordinary young people on a road trip that end up meeting with very nasty fates, right? But Partain as Franklin, though, is the one that stands out the most as far as, being the most memorable of them. And in some ways, I guess you could say, having a bit of a character arc. But Marilyn Burns, though, as Sally, when it comes to, say, the person who's exposed to the most horror, she stands out big time because, her character is put through so much in the movie. There's a lot of stuff that happens with her, both, psychologically and physically. There's so much, trauma that she's put through, and you get that famous, nightmarish scene where, she comes to and she's at the family's dinner table, and it's one of those classic moments in horror history type of moments, but when she's screaming and stuff, that was all her, and she really just went all out on showing just how terrified her character was. And Sally, she's definitely the one that stands out the most in terms of, say, showing the impact that the horror of the situation has on the characters, and she's kind of like the audience surrogate in that regard. So Franklin's the one who's probably the most relatable in the sense that he has the most in the way of emotion. Even though he's not a quote-unquote likable character. But Sally, though, is the character, who, basically, channels, the fear that the audience has of the situation. And Marilyn Burns does a really good job of that part. It's like, initially with the other character, when she's with the other characters, she just kind of blends in. And, of course, when she's bickering with Franklin, she kind of comes across as, you really buy the fact that she's Franklin's sister, right? But then when she's put into the horror of the situation, that's when, the acting, chops really come into play, just showing, just how, messed up the situation, is, and, how much it's traumatizing her. So, but yeah, as far as say, the horror of the movie itself, it is gruesome, but not quite as gruesome as you would think it would be. Especially with a title like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because, most of the kills, ironically, are done by way of a hammer, but at the same time, when the chainsaw is used, it's pretty disturbing but it's more like you get the idea of what's happening versus actually seeing what's happening. And the editing and stuff like that is done very well to convey exactly what's going on without showing too much. And in a lot of ways that makes things even more disturbing than, say, if it was an all-out gore fest. So it's gory in a mainly implied way, but at the same time, sometimes, what you don't see or what you can only glimpse is scarier than seeing everything, But another, spooky thing about the movie is the sound design, because, when the horror elements are coming into play, the sound design is set up to where Tobe Hooper and someone else, I forgot who, but had apparently, taken a recorder into a slaughterhouse and basically record all these sounds because they were wanting to, convey, the feeling of, of the audience, basically being animals being led into a slaughterhouse. And so it's like the sound effects you hear for basically the soundtrack in the movie, when the horror's happening, it's very disturbing for a reason, and it's because you're picking up a lot of the sounds that an animal would hear when it's in the slaughterhouse. So, yeah. But also the production design, was amazing as well, because, you had Robert Burns, who is the main gentleman in charge of, setting everything up and building, like the set designs and everything, because I mean they did use like some real houses and stuff, but they dressed them up like when they're in the cannibal house. I mean, you have this twisted there's these twisted pieces of artwork, like chairs made of that are adorned with bones, like where the seats got animal parts on them and stuff like that, as far as like skeletal structure and everything. You have lamps that are made from I guess you could say lampshades, made from human skin, and you see like the bulb, shining, through the skin, in some shots, and also just like the way some of the stuff is set up, like some of the bones kind of intertwined with feathers and what have you. There's a very almost a primal touch to it, like there was like a fetish or something, but yeah, just the production design, though, when it comes to, say, showing, the inner world of this cannibal family, I mean, it's very disturbing, but very breathtaking as well, just because of the creativity involved. Like, because this was made on a low budget, but they worked wonders with being able to, take the audience into this, nightmarish world that this cannibalistic family inhabits, and even though it's just a house, the stuff you do see in the house, I mean, there's like a twisted artistic vision to it, if that makes sense, and you definitely go away remembering what you see. So I mean, the horror, I mean, it works on so many levels, both, I mean, visually speaking, as well as what's implied as well. But also there's a good amount of commentary. If I mean, you listen to the commentary tracks and you know what to look for, but even if you don't know, like, say, the context of, say, certain historical elements that inspired the movie, I mean, you can pick up on social commentary, like when the hitchhiker, when Edwin Neal's character, the hitchhiker, is talking about how the invention of the bolt gun, is putting a lot of people in the slaughterhouse, out of jobs. I mean, it's one of those twisted moments wherein, I mean, his character's actually not wrong, but then when you find out what his character is involved in, you're kind of like, not sure if you're the person who needs to be making that point, but just, I mean, the whole idea of technological progress, I mean, being something that, I mean, yeah, it's more efficient, but the downside is people lose their jobs and stuff like that. I mean, that kind of went hand in hand with what was going on in the 70s with the recession and what have you. But also, like, the whole idea that this what was supposed to be just an ordinary road trip. I mean, you had this group of characters that was just expecting to have a good time, then just having the rug pulled out from under them. I mean, that tied into a lot of ways with, say, like the Vietnam War, as well as, say, people who are supposed to be in authority, basically, having an ulterior motive. And so it's interesting to pick up on stuff like that, because it's like, you had, the gruesome nature of the Campbell family in some ways, reflecting, the, hellish nature of war itself. But then, you have, like, say, someone who's in quote, quote, authority, not being truthful with, the main characters, namely, say, the old man, when he's, on one hand, he's trying to steer him away from, going, to a certain area, but he's not exactly telling him why, but then, of course, it turns out he's a part of the whole thing. So that's where you get the whole, the whole idea of, this, I guess you could say, representation of those in authority not being truthful, to those underneath them, things like that. And of course, you have the oil crisis, being reflected in the sense that the gas station, doesn't have any gas, and things like that. But yeah, I mean, the commentary, within the movie is actually rather interesting, especially if you pick up on some stuff from the 70s. But yeah, so as far as bonus features go, this is one of those things where, on one hand, the bonus features that the movie does have, and by the way, this is Dark Sky Films. They're the ones who put the DVD together. But this particular edition, this 40th anniversary edition, it has it only has 4 commentary tracks. That's the only special feature there is. The 4 commentary tracks, or excuse me, those are the only bonus features that the DVD has. But on the other hand, they're all very good commentary tracks. The first commentary track, you have writer and producer and director Tobe Hooper talking with actor Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface, and also joining them is cinematographer Daniel Pearl. And that one was a good commentary track in the sense that you're listening to the director of the movie, and talking with the main killer of the movie, and then also the two of them are talking with the guy who shot the movie, and the guy who basically gave it that sort of documentary style feel, visually speaking. But you find out some stuff like that Gunnar Hansen did to research the type of character he was playing, and you hear from Tobe Hooper about the ideas that he got to make the movie, or what gave him the ideas to make the movie, and all sorts of other stuff. But it's a pretty good listen. And if I remember correctly, that was the commentary track that was available several years ago on one of the DVDs or one of the editions, and so they sort of ported that one over. And it's still a good track though. But the second commentary track is from actress Marilyn Burns, who played Sally, and then you have actor Alan Danziger, who played her boyfriend Jerry. And then you have the late Paul A. Partain, who played Franklin, and production designer Robert Burns joins them. And that was probably my favorite of the commentary tracks, in a sense that it feels the most relaxed, and like and the reason you find out that actress Teri McMinn, who played Pam. You find out, one of the reasons why she's not involved in the commentary track was just because, her being in a horror movie was something that she didn't really feel proud of. And so, I mean, even though, yes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is an iconic horror movie, it's not a time in her life that she was, wanting to revisit, and so she just, abstained from the commentary, apparently. But the other actors who showed up, though, I mean, it was cool to listen to them reminisce and basically just chill with one another. And I mean, you find out some funny stories here and there, and I mean, you find out from both Marilyn Burns and Paul A. Partain that, I mean, Paul Partain basically stayed in character for a good amount of the time until the movie wrapped, and then he was like, I can be myself again. And then everyone was surprised at just how nice he was, and really after that. So that's where you find that out. But one of my favorite parts of that commentary track is towards the end of it. I forgot if they call someone or someone called, or if they dial the phone, or the phone rings or something like that. But Edwin Neal, the hitchhiker, they joins them, ever so briefly in the last few minutes of the commentary track. Edwin Neal, the guy who played the hitchhiker. And the funny thing is, he's actually at a convention when he calls them, and like because you hear like crowd in the background and everything. But he just calls in and says, "Hey, I just wanted to say hi to you guys," and then he sort of starts talking in character as the hitchhiker, and he just has everyone cracking up and the guy, Edwin Neal, I think was like 79 or 80 now, but I mean, but yeah, but this wasn't. This was like maybe like a year or two ago that this DVD was out, I think. But so I mean, Edwin Neal, I mean, like everyone else, I mean, he's up there in age at this point, but he was still able to make himself sound like the hitchhiker, and I thought that was pretty cool. But I mean, he clearly, enjoyed working with the actors though, and the ones who played his food, so to speak. So, but yeah, I mean, that was probably my favorite commentary track, and. Also, I was just going to say, Alan Danziger, yeah, like, I'm not like, I don't think he's been in a whole lot as far as like movies or anything like that, but I mean, he was happy to have been a part of, Texas Chainsaw, and so even though like, he's a lesser known actor, I mean, in comparison, I guess, I mean, not that the other actors are very well known not as either, but he had some fun stories to tell, so I thought that was nice. But I'm not sure why the actor William Vail was unavailable. Not really sure why he wasn't included, but unfortunately he's not there. But so there, the third commentary track it has Tobe Hooper talking with someone else, and I forgot who the guy was. I'm sorry to say, but I think he may have been like. Maybe like a columnist or a documentary maker or something like that. But that was a pretty good commentary track as well. And one of the funny things that I found out in that commentary track, and it may have been touched upon in the first commentary track, the other one that Tobe Hooper was in, but they were talking about how weed was kind of prevalent at times. And now, not necessarily during the shooting, but say, like it was nearby. And then, after, the movie was shot, they're like, okay, let's, just kick back, But, I mean, that was actually, I think that commentary track was more relaxed than the first one that Tobe Hooper was in. I'm not really sure how to explain it really, but maybe, just because it's more of a one-on-one type of conversation versus say, one-on-two, that kind of thing. But you also have the fourth commentary track has a cinematographer, Daniel Pearl, who was also in the first commentary track, editor J. Larry Carroll, and sound recordist Ted Nakalu, who, for the record, has gone on to be a director himself. Like he's directed several B movies in that particular career, but that one I thought was interesting because you find out that once again the subject of weed comes up, like marijuana crops, and it turns out that the house that they were using for, I believe it was the cannibal house. I think it was that house that they were talking about. But there was a marijuana crop. There was a very huge marijuana crop that the owners of the house had, and so it's like at the time it was illegal to smoke weed, and so it's like they're cracking up about how the crops were having to be covered up and everything in case the police came by or something like that, and then they start reflecting on how crazy it was that smoking weed back in the 70s could land you in jail for maybe a few years, I think, versus now where, well, I mean, it's kind of commonplace to smoke it or do it edible or something like that. And so it's interesting to see them reflect on stuff like that and how it was back then versus how it is now. So, but all in all, though, I mean, they're all good commentary tracks, and I mean there is some overlap because obviously they're all talking about the same thing, and in some of the commentary tracks you have the same people appearing in more than one, but I mean you learn a lot about the movie just from listening to commentary tracks, and but I do wish that considering this is the 40th anniversary edition of the movie, I do wish that they had kept the bonus material that had been in place on this one version of the DVD. I remember I had it. It was a long time ago, but it was like a steelbook case, and there was like this really good documentary about the movie. I think it was called The Sawdust Family, but don't quote me on that. But you found out a whole bunch of stuff there. And one of the things I remember from that particular documentary that I just wish that they had included it here. But one of the things from that documentary I remember is one of the people who was involved in making like the props and stuff, like as far as say like working with dead animals and what have you, was trying to like taxidermy a dead animal, but something happened and she accidentally, I think she had slipped or something, like her hand slipped, and she accidentally taxidermied herself. Like she accidentally taxidermied part of her leg. So like that was a pretty crazy accident, right? But you find this out in that documentary, but you also find out in like I believe it was the first commentary track with Tobe Hooper and Gunnar Hansen. But one of the things that comes up is that they were working in 100 plus degree weather, and it took a toll on them, because I mean they had like little in the way of air conditioning, but also little in the way of wardrobe. And so like in the case of Gunnar Hansen, he only had what he wore as Leatherface, and because he only had that one costume, he wasn't allowed to wash it or bathe it in case it got ruined, even though I mean yeah, you're going to get some messy stuff on there because of the blood and gore and everything, but he basically couldn't bathe for several days, and so the rest of the cast and crew would refuse to eat with him, and so he'd be by himself, and you feel kind of sorry for him when you hear about that, but then they reflect on the fact that actually helped his performance as Leatherface, because I mean he wasn't associating with anyone, behind the scenes while the movie was being made. When he's on screen and interacting with the people, the terror is real because they tried to avoid him, when the cameras were off, and then when they're having to interact with him, it's like, oh my God, So you find that out both in that documentary and the Steelbook edition, as well as the commentary track with, Tobe Hooper and Gunnar Hansen, But apparently, though, during the famous dinner scene, things got so stressful, because of the heat, because of how hot it was, there was no refrigeration. They had this food on the table that was spoiling in the span of hours, and so that was making things even more stressful. And Gunnar Hansen remembers at one point, he felt like, he should kill Marilyn Burns, the actress who's playing Sally, because it just felt like the thing to do as Leatherface. He felt like he felt like he had become the character. I mean, that's how stressed out he was. But he's like, wait a minute, what am I about to do? So that was pretty. I mean, in a perverse way, it was kind of funny to hear about it. Hear Gunnar Hansen tell it. But at the same time, it's pretty scary if you think about it, just considering the amount of stress that the crew must have had to, endure because of the heat and everything. And Edwin Neal, the guy who played the Hitchhiker, one thing I remember from the documentary, from that Steelbook edition, was, he talked about how prior to being in this movie, he had actually served in Vietnam. Like he had moved troops in Vietnam. And that's some dangerous stuff right there. And being in Vietnam was, no picnic in terms of, environment and terrain. But he said that his time working in Texas Chainsaw Massacre was, worse than when he was in Vietnam. And he said that because of how stressful it was, he, did not like work. He ended up developing a dislike for Tobe Hooper, during and after the movie. So, there might be a reason as to why he's not included in any of the commentary tracks, but yeah, with the exception of, the end of that second one with the actors, right? But, Tobe Hooper in a couple of in both of the ones he's in actually talks about, how, a lot of the cast and crew ended up, hating him because he's the one who's, in charge, and he's the one who's making them go through, filming with these, strenuous conditions, but at the same time, in a way that kind of helped the camaraderie because they were kind of united in their dislike of him. And that kind of, helped for conveying, the stress and the horror of the situation that the characters were in. And of course, once the movie was made, it was like, it was all worthwhile, so, but yeah, like I said, the commentary tracks that are on this disc, they're the only features, but they're all good commentary tracks. I just wish that, considering this was the 40th anniversary edition, that the documentary from the Steelbook edition from all those years ago had been ported over, because that first commentary track had been ported over as well, and I'm just thinking surely they could have, thrown in that, documentary, But other than that, though, I think that one, this is a great horror movie, and two, this is a great disc. So I'm going to go ahead and give Texas Chainsaw Massacre 40th Anniversary Edition 5 out of 5 stars. This is a classic horror movie, and it still holds up to this day. So thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line and let me know. And you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all have a great night. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.